Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and I'll be taking you through the next 30 minutes or so with some topical news, some controversial views, and some better biking tips. Well, we'll be looking at smart motorways today, and you'll see why in a moment. Don't forget, if you've got any comments, any questions, any feedback on the show itself, I'm always happy to look at those. And if there's anything you ever want me to cover, do drop me a line and I'll do my best to fit it in a future show. So what have we got for you today? We have the sad news that a woman was killed on her own son's memorial ride out in Colorado. A rider who's facing life-changing injuries after a smart motorway crash. Bennett's, the insurance company, had been bought by Right Choice Holdings. I'll explain what that was all about. The French government is working with riders' rights groups to fight EU plans for compulsory motorcycle technical inspections. My Facebook counter-steering post has topped 11,000 hits, and a former jet pilot has developed some airbag trousers. And finally, we'll look at some strategies for staying safe on smart motorways. So settle yourself down, grab yourself a brew, and you can join me every Wednesday and Sunday at 11 here for the Elevenses show. Don't forget, if you can't make it live, you can catch up with the show over on my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Do not forget the all-important UK, or you'll get somebody showing you how to sharpen a knife with a blunt stick or something. Or you can find me over on my coffee.com survival skills page. Right, okay, so with no further ado, on with the news. One of the sort of things I kind of always slightly worry about is memorial rides. It's a great thing to do, to go out and show your respect to somebody who maybe has died, or sometimes died on a motorcycle. But group riding always comes with a degree of risk, and very sadly, a woman in Colorado was killed actually taking part in the memorial ride that had been organized for her own son. Diane Everett, who was 51, apparently lost control of her Honda on a bend during the ride, which was early on Saturday afternoon. The bike went into a ditch. It struck a culvert in the ditch, and she was seriously injured. It's not entirely clear what the circumstances of the crash were, but the Colorado State Patrol did say that a horse was also involved. Diane was transported to the UCH medical center of the Rockies, but she died of her injuries shortly after her arrival. Her son, Michael Jr., who was 23, was killed in a motorcycle crash on April the 5th this year, and the memorial run had attracted more than 80 riders. In another incident, a rider, a 33-year-old motorcyclist, has suffered life-altering injuries on a smart motorway, and he claims his accident could have been prevented had there been a hard shoulder. Jack Gallatry was travelling in lane 4 of the M6 southbound near junction 18 when his motorcycle started losing power. Now, he apparently worked his way over as far as lane 2, but the lane next to him, which would have been the hard shoulder, was actually already occupied by a couple of HGVs. And he said that even though the bike was losing power, he had just enough in hand to get ahead of those lorries and then move across to the far left without putting himself directly under their wheels. And he aimed to be on the edge of the tarmac so that he could roll to a halt and the lorries could still pass safely. Now, what happened next isn't entirely clear, because he has no exact memory of the event, but he clearly lost control of the bike as he got to the edge of the road, and he crashed. And the resulting injuries left him with some severe fractures in his left leg, and the repair job means that basically his left leg is now an inch shorter than his right. He also has severe damage to his kneecap, which means he's now unable to bend that leg properly. To prevent the leg being amputated, he actually needed a skin graft, which was taken from his forearm. So that's left his arm scarred and sensitive as well. The crash meant that he's been out of work for almost a year and a half, as he's self-employed. He doesn't get any support. And he faces at least another year while he's attempting to recover from the consequences of this crash. Now, he believes that had there been a hard shoulder, the accident could have been prevented, and he says smart motorways are death traps whose existence is completely nonsensical. He said I could have pulled in, got the tools off the bike and checked if I could have made any adjustments. And if it couldn't be resolved, I could have waited for breakdown recovery. No harm whatsoever, but instead I have life-changing injuries and I could have died. It's not an ineffective alternative anyway, seeing as the lanes don't seem to close for breakdowns. And then what if you come to a sudden stop as a breakdown, but you have an HGV right behind you? There's no safety element whatsoever to them. When approached for comment, a Highways England spokesman told Cheshire Live, where this story was originally reported, our thoughts are with the motorcyclist and we wish him well with his recovery. While the police are investigating, we're unable to provide further comment on this specific collision. Well, I'm a bit slightly surprised about that, seeing as the crash took place well over a year ago. I would have thought that their investigations would have concluded by now, but hey-ho. Highways England, of course, continue to insist that smart motorways are as safe as conventional motorways with hard shoulders, if not safer. Recent figures that have come to light cast some doubt on those claims, but whatever the truth is, stay tuned to the end of the show where I'll be looking at some techniques that we can use to try to stay safe on smart motorways. So who have we got? Clive has looked in and says, good morning. Hi there, Clive, good to see you. All right, so elsewhere in the news, you may recall that I ran a story in Elevenses just about October, I think it was, about the purchase of the motorcycle insurance specialists, Bennett's Motorcycle Services. And they were being purchased by the Ardona Group Limited. Now that, as I said at the time, it's likely that you were insured by a company owned by one of these two giants, because Ardona are actually the name behind Swinton's and Carroll Nash. Now, the deal was forged back in February 2020. Ardona paid 26 million for Bennett's at that time. And basically what it did was it combined the UK's three biggest motorcycle insurance businesses into one giant company. And so big, in fact, that the resulting company actually dwarfs the remaining competition. It's 3 times larger than its next biggest competitor after that. Now, not entirely surprisingly, the merger promptly attracted the attention of the Competition and Markets Authority, who began an investigation in August. And they said basically that they were concerned about higher prices, less choice and worse services for motorcyclists across the UK. They were quoted as saying at the time, we're concerned that Ardona buying up its most important competitor could lead to a lack of competition in the market, resulting in a worse deal for customers across the UK when they next come to renew their policies. And ultimately their decision was that the merger should be reversed and Ardona duly put Bennett's up for sale. So earlier this month, Right Choice Holdings Limited announced that they have actually acquired the Bennett's Motorcycling Services Limited from the Ardona Group. They haven't disclosed how much they paid for it. Now, Bennett's were established in 1930, and as one of the UK's largest motorcycling insurance brands, they will become a sister company to Right Choice Insurance Brokers, RCIB, under the Right Choice Holdings umbrella. RCIB is a successful motor insurance broker, and they specialize in non-standard risks, which perhaps gives us a little bit of hope for motorcycle insurance. They're based in Romford. They already have over 225,000 customers. RCIB said the acquisition will present no disruption or changes to service for the 200,000 motorcyclists that currently are insured with Bennett's across the UK. And as I said last year, putting most of the eggs into one seller's basket is never likely to be a good idea for customers. Forcing our donors to compete head-on with other brokers for new business and renewals does at least offer a chance that the trend of soaring premiums over the last few years is reversed, or even put on hold would be good. Okay, so over in the EU, plans for a compulsory MOT style inspection for all motorcycles are being fought by the French government. Now, this all goes back to a European Union decision that member countries should bring in inspections for all powered two-wheelers. That decision was taken in 2014, and the plan was that they should be in place by January 2022. Now, obviously, the UK has its MOT test, but not every country in Europe actually has any kind of standardized testing for motorcycles. And effective lobbying by the riders' rights groups in France have actually led the French government to change their view, and are now working on a common position with those rights groups as to why France should not be forced to impose these EU measures. And they're not alone. Finland, Ireland, and the Netherlands take the same view. Now, an estimated 2.5 million people actually hold a motorcycle license in France, and it's reckoned that there are another 1.5 million who use scooters and other powered two-wheelers that do not require the full motorcycle permit. But Aurélie Ronfort, she's the National Secretary of the Fédération Française de Motards en Colère, the Federation of Angry French Motorcyclists, has said that the mandatory inspections would do little to improve road safety. She points out that in France we are unusual in that there is one mutual insurance company which insures an overwhelming majority of bikers, and so we have very accurate data. This has been looked at, and only 0.03% of accidents involving powered two-wheelers involve a technical failure. It's a tiny number, and to impose the expense and disruption of a control technique in the country using the safety argument does not make sense. The Federation of Angry French Motorcyclists also point out that another factor is that motorbikes and cars, the motorcycles do far fewer miles every year than cars, less than 6,000 kilometers a year, she says. And as she says, that's often the recommended limit for bikes to go in for a service. So most of them are checked over in a workshop at least once a year. And she also points out that unlike a car, the motor and other bits aren't hidden away, so bikers are far more likely to get into the routine of checking their motorcycles before riding. The cost of installing the infrastructure is also up for question, and the cost is likely to run into hundreds of thousands of euros to set up these testing stations. So, all right, she says, as a federation, we work hard to educate bikers about using their machines sensibly and responsibly. There are always some who don't respond, but basically that's a little bit of an eye-opener. I think that the French government are actually working to reduce the burden of legislation acting on motorcyclists. So that's some good news from France there. Right, what have I been up to? Well, it's always quite pleasant when a post of mine gets a lot of hits, because it means I've done something right. Basically, if I cover a topic that a lot of people want to know about, that's a good thing. But it also needs to be in a way that other people will comment on, because one of the biggest problems of Facebook is that it's interactions with the post itself that cause that post to go sort of viral, as it were, amongst other people's pages. One of the big issues on Facebook is I can put a post up, and even someone who regularly visits my page won't actually always see the post, which is why, of course, I've recently launched the newsletter, which actually indexes the posts on a weekly basis for you. So if you do not want to get posts on a regular basis, that is something you can sign up to. But this particular post has done better than normal. Let me just zoom in on that. If you look closely, you should see that it's actually had over 11,000 30,000 hits. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that everybody who that was delivered to has read every single word of it, but it is a good indicator of how well that post has popped up on people's timelines. If you did miss it on Saturday last week, you can catch up with it over on my Ko-fi page, where you can view it free of charge for up to about 2 months. So there's the link to that particular post over there, save you having to search through it on Facebook, or you can go and join my Streams Stack newsletter. I've forgotten to put the link up to that for the moment, but I'll try and remember to do that later in the comments when I finish the show. Okay, basically I've been writing better biking posts online since the early 1990s, which is when I first got online on CompuServe actually, and I've been continually active on motorcycle forums, most recently the Rev to the Limit forum. You can find me over there trying to help people when they ask for advice. And of course, the Skills on Saturday and the Tips on Tuesday posts have been running since 2013, actually, here. I opened this Facebook page in 2012. And over the last year or so, I've been shuffling those over steadily, the old archive, which is almost impossible, of course, to find on Facebook. Fortunately, I did copy them all before I put them up. I've been putting them over on that Ko-fi page. So at the moment over there, you can find every post from 2014, 2015, 2016 and 2017. So that's 100 a year. So that makes a total of 400. There's an index page for each year so that you can actually find what you want to read. And I'm in the middle of putting up the 2018 articles. I'm up to about July in the Tips on Tuesday series. So there's about 25 or so gone up so far over there. So it's almost certainly the biggest internet resource that riders have access to on the internet. And if you want to support my future writing, you can contribute a Ko-fi over there, and for just £3 you'll get a month's access to all those hundreds of articles. Right, okay, so moving on with the next story then. Inflatable trousers may sound like something out of Monty Python or Blackadder, but after an accident in 2016, Xavier Beauquillard de Milleret had an idea. He was lying in pain in hospital. Here's a photograph of the gentleman concerned. Wondering why we do not have the same protection for our legs and lower bodies as we had for our heads and upper bodies. Now, it is a question that's occurred to me on a number of occasions, given that the majority of rider injuries actually involve the lower limbs. De Milleret also looked at the numbers, and he found that between 60 and 80% of the injuries suffered by bikers are to the legs, and they can be life-changing, as we have indeed seen in the accident I referred to earlier. In his accident, he says a car rolled backwards into his path after the handbrake wasn't applied properly. And he said, although I wasn't going fast, it knocked me off the bike and onto a curbside, which smashed my leg. He's from Toulouse. He's a former jet fighter pilot, and his leg was fractured in 17 places. And whilst recovering at home, he recalled the pressure suit trousers from his flight training 30 years earlier. Now, these flight trousers blow up tight, and they stop blood rushing from the head to the feet during high G maneuvers, which basically helps keep the pilot conscious. And so after several years of R&D, this is what was born, his CX Aerodynamics airbag over trousers. They're apparently being tested by regulatory bodies at the moment, although they're already on sale with a price of around €480. The lightweight trousers are designed to go over existing motorcycle kit. They're made of waterproof, abrasion resistant material, and they do include knee pads and standard hip pads, although quite why you would do that if they're over trousers, I'm not entirely sure, as well as the airbags themselves. Now, they are triggered by a leash at the moment, which is clipped to the trigger which fires that air cartridge. But a second version of the Trousers is underway using an electronic trigger similar to some of the more advanced airbag jackets. And he says if all goes well, that should be available next year sometime. He says if I'd been wearing these airbag trousers, I'm sure I would not have been so badly hurt or not hurt at all. Now, will they be effective? Well, if you part company with a motorcycle, a loss of control crash is actually surprisingly common in urban areas. Then having an extra layer of protection can't be a bad thing, although I'd be interested to know just how abrasion resistant the material over the airbag is. If it's just a lightweight material, then my worry is that you fall off once and you end up with a scrap airbag after just a minor spill. When it comes to collisions, the most common urban crash, of course, I do have my doubts. The problem with any lanyard triggered airbag is that there's a delay in the deployment in a frontal collision. And that certainly caused issues with airbags when you hit a car sideways on. There is that delay in the airbag triggering, which does severely limit their effect, which is why they're moving to the more advanced airbags where there is a detector on the front wheel which recognizes, or on the front forks I should say, which recognizes the rapid deceleration and triggers the airbag almost before the rider starts to move. In the event of a side-on collision, well, I don't know. Again, how is the lanyard going to do anything useful? If you're hit from the side, by definition, you're not actually sort of moving on the bike at the time. So I'm doubtful that they would prevent injury in that case. And I have to say, I'm not entirely happy with the positioning of the gas bottle there, which appears to be aimed fairly accurately at the rider's groin area. Nevertheless, all these developments are something to keep an eye on. I'm sure that some of the wrinkles will be ironed out as we go. If you want to have a little bit more of a look at what's going on, then you can do so via the link, which I'm just about to put up for you. So there it is. So we've got a bit of a theme running through today's show. We've got the smart motorway crash, and we have the rider whose leg was broken and who developed the airbag jacket. So I'm going to finish off by looking at riding on smart motorways. Now, the first thing to ask ourselves is what actually is a smart motorway. Now, most of us think of them as those motorways which have been widened by converting what was formerly the hard shoulder into an extra running lane. So what we're probably anticipating is something that looks a bit like that. Let me go zoom in on that a bit and you can see what we're looking at there. But that is only one kind of smart motorway. That's known as the all-lane running smart motorway. The hard shoulder has been permanently taken away and converted to a running lane, and there are a number of refuges at intervals down the motorway where you can pull off and get out of the flow of the traffic. However, there are also dynamic running motorways. Now, the inside lane, the hard shoulder, only becomes a running lane at busy times to relieve congestion. So at the rest of the time, it's actually still the hard shoulder. And the distinction is that this lane still has that thick white line separating it from the normal running lanes. Whether or not the lane is actually open is signalled by the gantry signs. If the board overhead is blank or there is a red X on it, then the lane is closed. And other matrix signs should say hard shoulder for emergency use only. But there is a third kind of smart motorway, and that's known as the controlled motorway. And that retains the full hard shoulder, but it has variable speed limits. And the aim on those roads is to pack the vehicles more closely together to increase the capacity of the road, and that's why the speed limit comes down. You can get more vehicles closer together as the speed drops. So the big question is, how do you know you're on the smart motorway? Because one of the issues that's been identified is that many road users simply don't realise they're even on a smart motorway. I'm fairly astonished, but during the recent study, People were honestly saying that they'd never heard of them, they didn't know what they were, and they were really surprised to discover that they were actually riding up and down or driving up and down smart motorways. So if you're on a stretch with all lane running, the most obvious clue is that the hard shoulder is missing. And there is only a broken white line separating the inside two lanes. So let's just go back to that photo again, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. There you go. There is no hard shoulder. There is only that broken line between the two near side lanes. So what are the problems? Let's deal with them in order of simplicity. On a controlled motorway with standard hard shoulder, the only thing really to watch out for is that the speed limit may change. Now, if the limit drops to a lower one, you're obviously going to have to drop your speed to match, but do watch the mirrors to ensure drivers behind are also reacting. One of the problems on these kind of roads is that drivers put the cruise control on, so they may be less alert to the gantry signs than you, or even a driver with a foot on the pedal. And the second thing to watch out for is the gantry sign changing just as you go under it. That happened to me years ago when these things were being trialed. And as I came out the other side, still doing 70 miles an hour, because literally the gantry sign went from 70 to 50 as I went under it, the camera flashed. Now, I didn't get a ticket on that occasion because Highways England have clarified that there is a lag between if tickets being issued from a speed camera if the gantry has only just changed. Now, how long that lag is, I have no idea, so I wouldn't expect it to be 2 or 3 minutes, but what it should mean is that you shouldn't actually have to slam the brakes on to comply with the lower speed limit. You should be able to decelerate naturally, but it is worth keeping an eye on gantries with cameras on for obvious reasons. Now, what about the dynamic motorways where, as I just explained, these are the ones where the hard shoulders only open some of the time? Well, the big problem with these ones is that in my experience at least, and in my own personal experience, we often get confused when they're open and when they're closed. Yes, the gantry sign should make it clear, but it's not always obvious. And of course, that lane can open and close while you're in it. And I've also found stretches where it is open on some of its length and closed on others, which is even more confusing because you have to move out of it when the next stretch is closed. Okay, so what are the problems? Well, if the lane's closed, somebody actually driving down the hard shoulder thinking it's open when they shouldn't be there isn't really too much of an issue, unless you happen to be stopped somewhere ahead of that driver. So don't forget the regular advice as to what you're supposed to do if you do break down. Get the bike as far over to the left as you can, and then get over the barrier yourself and stand somewhere safe. And remember, stand behind the bike, so we should be able to see the number plate, not the front of the headlight, because if you think about it, if something does hit it from behind, the debris will fly forward, and don't under any circumstances stand in the road. The other problem I've experienced with these roads, though, is that some drivers won't be aware when the lane is actually open. So now, if we're in the left-hand lane, the big danger is that approaching an exit, somebody will actually swing straight through our lane and off to the slip road because they are simply not aware that there is traffic on the inside lane. That certainly happened to me up around Birmingham, very near miss. So my advice there is don't undertake. Even if you can move faster than traffic to your right, not anywhere near a junction. My general advice on these, I'd simply stay off the hard shoulder even when it's open, particularly on a bike. I've had too many misses from drivers who really don't understand what's going on where on these, particularly, as I said, turning across me at junctions. And finally, onto the smart motorway with the all-lane running and no hard shoulder at all. Now, the first issue, and something that a lot of riders and drivers don't think about until they're actually getting stuck in a problem, is that these roads have no exit at the bottom of the slip road. On a conventional motorway, if you get to the end of the slip road and discover it's impossible to pull out onto the main carriageway, the hard shoulder in front of you offers you an out. You're not supposed to use it. Technically speaking, you're looking at a give-way junction. But you can actually keep moving down the hard shoulder and then find a gap at when one becomes available to get out onto the running lane. Now, as the proud owner, formerly the proud owner of Britain's slowest accelerating car, copyright J. Clarkson, which was a diesel Nissan Serena, I've actually needed to do that a couple of times when accelerating or attempting to accelerate uphill to a motorway, and I simply didn't have the acceleration to get out when I found myself boxed in by the obligatory string of HGVs nose to tail. So a sort of short diversion up the hard shoulder allowed me to find a gap, but to keep moving. There's nothing worse than trying to get onto a fast moving road from a standstill. And unfortunately, at the bottom of a smart motorway, you will find that the slip road runs out. They're generally quite long, but it still doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have that option. So that creates a problem. We have to join the motorway ourselves. On the bike, it shouldn't be that much of a problem if we're on the ball with our planning. But every time we pass a slip road, other vehicles will be trying to merge out into the inside lane, and that is very much more of a problem. So from a purely practical point of view, if we're on the main carriageway, it makes an awful lot of sense to assume that a driver in the slip road will keep coming and merge into the flow of traffic even when it's nose to tail. And never forget that for a driver struggling to look in a door mirror and find out what's coming up on his right side, the space that our bike's in may well look like a gap, particularly if we position ourselves very much right of centre in our lane. So be aware of that. The next issue, of course, is encountering a stopped vehicle. Now, although a vehicle can break down in any lane, most drivers do try to get over to the near side. And of course, the latest safety advertising campaign is all about doing just that. So in theory, as soon as you see a red X above a lane, it means that the lane ahead is closed for some reason. It could be a broken down vehicle, could be a collision, could just be debris in the road. But you must exit that lane into one of the other lanes as soon as you possibly see it. So if the vehicle's broken down on the near side, you'll have to move to the right. Now, here's the problem. Many of these roads still don't have stopped vehicle detection radar, and that means somebody actually has to spot the stopped vehicle in one of the CCTV cameras, and the time it takes them to do that, instead of being measured in seconds, is actually measured in minutes. And even then, when the control room actually spots the broken down vehicle and illuminates the road closed red X sign, the lane can only be closed from the gantry behind the obstruction. So that leaves all the vehicles between that gantry behind and the broken down vehicle ahead, who are blissfully unaware that there is an obstruction in the lane in front. So I am particularly cautious on the inside lane on an all-lane running stretch. And one thing I will not do is get anywhere near the back of a high-sided wide vehicle, because if that driver drives up to the back of the obstruction and swerves aside at the last moment, we are not going to have time to see it ourselves and take similar evasive action. If we're too close, we simply will not have time to avoid it, the problem. And that's how a lot of these crashes are happening on these smart motorways. So once again, unless you're riding a bike that really isn't capable of holding a position in the lanes to the right, I'd simply stay out of lane one altogether, unless traffic is very light and gaps between vehicles are wide. And at all times, I will avoid sitting behind a truck. Whenever possible, I will overtake and move back ahead of it where I have a clearer view. And if I can't overtake, then I will leave a big gap in front of me. So what if you break down the last case? Well, these roads have those regular pull-offs. Again, you'll see the whoops, that's not the right one. Let's put that one back in. There they are. Your trouble you'll spot with those, of course, is that not at regular intervals. They can be very hard to see, where with barriers around them and grass and banks, and the signing, in my opinion, is entirely inadequate, and that is something apparently that's being addressed to improve the signing. So you're never quite sure where the next one is, but so you'll need to be on the lookout if you know that you're going to need to pull off. If you can't get into one of those gaps, then you need to be particularly cautious, and that is not a great place to be in. I'm under absolutely no illusions about the danger of stopping in a live lane, because some years ago I had a car actually written off after a forced stop on a dual carriageway. I'd actually been stopped for about 30 seconds. I'd waited for one truck to go past and got out of the car, and I was just hurrying around the front of it when the back of the car was actually hit by another vehicle. Now, the only thing that saved me from being running down by my own car was that it was a glancing blow, but it did rip off the front and rear wheels of the two respective vehicles. And the other driver was also lucky to be relatively unhurt after her car bounced off both sets of Armco inside and outside on the lanes. So it was luck, really, more than anything else. So if you can't make it over into one of these refuges, then get the bike as far over to the left as you can. Slow down with an eye on the mirrors. Use the hazards, use the left indicator if necessary, even use an arm signal to show that you're doing something a bit unusual. But try not to do what the rider, I suspect, did in that crash that I was talking about earlier. I suspect what he tried to do was drive onto the dirt at speed and lost control. There are all sorts of drains and things hidden in the long grass. I crashed myself on one of those years ago. So keep it on the road until you're almost stopped, and then get it off the road at the last moment. And again, remember, once you're off the bike, get over that barrier and move to the rear of the bike and stand well clear. You could be there for quite some time. And last point, for God's sakes, check your fuel before you get onto one of these roads. One of the most common reasons for breaking down on smart motorways is running out of fuel. It's as simple as that. Right, okay, well, I hope that has given you some helpful tips on how to use smart motorways reasonably safely. That's it for today. Don't forget, you can catch up with the latest tips on Tuesday and skills on Saturday. Posts over on my coffee page. There is the newsletter, that was the other thing I was going to say, which you can sign up to. I've had a batch of sign-ups for that. Don't forget, tips on Tuesday, start again, 60 Second Safety, my safety video series, should be back tomorrow with a new one. And that's pretty much it for today. Thanks to everybody for looking in. I hope you have enjoyed the show. We've been a bit light on viewers today, but we can't get everybody in every day, I guess. All right, Kirsty Green says, very interesting, thanks. You're welcome, Kirsty. Glad it all made sense to you. And Clive says thanks too. Right, so back on Sunday with the next edition of Elevenses. Stay safe out there, and see you soon. Thanks for looking in. Bye for now.